Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to put out a little bit of an update vlog here, as I haven't done one of these since I worked Cluj, which was back in February of this year. And since then, I worked the PGL Bucharest event in the PGL studio in Bucharest back in April. And then I had a bit of a break for a few weeks, but I then went over to Copenhagen to work the Blast Rivals event, which was initially going to be in Mexico, but had to pivot to being into Denmark. And so I worked that event, and then I went straight from that event actually to Astana. Didn't come home first. It just didn't make sense logistics wise to travel home, only be home for like a day or two at most, and then have to fly all the way to Astana from America because it is a lot of travel. Just to kind of explain that for you, when I flew back home from Astana, it took about 28 to 30 hours to do that, just because it is a lot of flying. From flying from Astana to one of the main European airports, like a Frankfurt or an Amsterdam or something along those lines, or Charles de Gaulle, some of these big airports in Europe, it's about like 8 hours, 8 or 9 hours to fly from Astana to one of those European airports, and then to fly from one of those European airports to a connecting airport in America, somewhere in Texas or Atlanta or DC or whatever. That's like another 10 hours of flying. Then, of course, you add in layovers and all that jazz. And yeah, it takes a lot of time. So I kind of saved time by going straight from Copenhagen to Astana, because basically from Copenhagen, I was able to fly to Frankfurt, which was only a couple of hours. And then it was about 7 hours from Frankfurt, or 7.5 hours from Frankfurt to Astana. So much easier to do it that way. And so I was on the road for like 20 something days or something like that this last stint that I just did. But with all that said, super grateful to have the opportunity to be able to work consistently this year. When I did the Shanghai major at the end of last year, it was obviously a dream come true to finally get to work a major. Something I chased for many, many years, never was able to achieve, had to walk away from Counter-Strike for several years because there just weren't really any opportunities for me to work in the Counter-Strike space. You know, Worked in Valorant obviously for 3 years, got fucked over by Riot, had to walk away from that due to situations that occurred there, which I've already talked about in other videos if you're curious. And I didn't really know what was gonna happen, right? I even started working as an EMT full time, thinking that I was just gonna transition out of esports altogether, and figured out something else to do. And then, PGL last year, kind of when they got back into Counter Strike full time with their majors, and now obviously they're running the circuit this year. They thought of me because I was one of the guys who worked with them in the past, and they kind of brought me back, kind of revived my career, honestly. And I've been able to work, the RMRs for the Copenhagen major, then the RMRs for the Shanghai major, and the Shanghai major itself. And then I have worked all their events so far this year: Cluj, Bucharest, and now, of course, just Astana. But then on top of that, I had reached out to people after the Shanghai major, letting them know that I was interested in, working on the desk and becoming a regular in CS2 again as a broadcaster. And Blast took me up on that offer. I spoke with them. I sent them a reel of my analyst work from the Shanghai major, and they watched that reel. They read my email, and they were interested. They got back with me, and they gave me a shot. They let me work the Blast Rivals event, and it was a great time. So yeah, first of all, just very grateful that PGL has put that trust in me, after the Shanghai major, that they were happy with how things went. They've continued to bring me along and make me a part of the rotation for the year. And hopefully I'll be doing more for them this year. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a break between now and their next event. I think their next event is Belgrade, which is in October. And then they're also the English broadcaster for the CAC tournament. It's obviously the CS Asia Championships. I believe they're in Shanghai or something along those lines. They're obviously run by Perfect World, which is the same people who obviously ran the Shanghai Major, where, again, PGL was the official English broadcast partner. But yeah, I believe that's in Shanghai sometime in like mid-October. So there's a chance I'll be able to do kind of like back-to-back gigs in October for PGL, between them being the English broadcast for CAC and then their own PGL Belgrade event. But we'll just have to see. Either way, that is, 4 months away. So there's a lot of uncertainty, what I'll do between now and then, which is always a little bit worrisome and scary as a freelancer. But at the same time, it just comes with the territory, and it is what it is. So just kind of wanted to talk about these last few events. Again, I did the Bucharest studio event. It was an opportunity to discontinue my relationship with PGL and just continue to, work things out. And it was a great event. Had a really good time working that event. Working with all the regulars that I've been working with at PGL now for the last several events, and just had a really good time. Was really cool stuff. And then I got to work with Blast for the first time, so obviously that's always a little bit nervy working with a new crew for the first time. New production people, new vision, new culture, just a different style of doing things. But I very quickly was able to get along pretty well with all the PGL production staff and things of that nature when it comes to how they operate things behind the scenes, how they plan out their shows, how they do their production meetings, how they do all these different things. I was able to, really fit in pretty quickly with all that. I got to work an interesting desk at that event where we had Pimp as a host, who is normally an analyst, but he's actually been doing hosting stuff for Blast and for ESL. But then he kind of is an analyst for ESL once they get to the playoffs. So he's kind of in this weird hybrid role lately, which has been interesting. Obviously I've worked alongside Pimp as an analyst. We did a couple of games together at Cluj, and I've worked with him in the past at DreamHack Opens and stuff like that. So it was interesting to work with him in that capacity. But I think one of the cool things about him being a host is that he knows the type of questions analysts like to answer because he's an analyst. So it does provide a little bit of cool carryover, I think. And then I was working with Dupree, 5-time Asia champion. So it's kind of an interesting desk that I got to work with. And then when we got to the playoffs of the Rivals, then it was a situation where Darth Mike was the host, which, I have known Mike for a very long time, just him being in the NA scene and us working online together at different points in time. But to finally get to see him in person was really cool. Hadn't ever met him before then. And I'm going to tell you this guy is a really good host, really good desk host, really good stage host, really good interviewer. I really hope that we see more of Mike out there in the future. I feel like he's a little bit underutilized in my opinion. And so it was really cool to get to work with him. And then I got to work with Vu a little bit during the playoffs as well. So Vu's obviously, I know his YouTube channel, and I've spoken to him on social media in the past, but to work with him in person was a lot of fun. He's a really cool dude. Definitely has his own way of doing things. He definitely likes to make the cheeky take or say the controversial thing. Maybe not controversial, but he's like the contrarian. He'll just say some contrarian shit just to stir the pot, And basically the shit that you see him say on Twitter when he makes these crazy ass tweets or says these crazy ass things in his YouTube videos, he is just that guy. That is him. Literally. He does the same exact shit on the desk. It's actually great. It actually is a cool little flavor to the desk that maybe not many other people are doing. So I actually kind of respect him for that. And it was a lot of fun working with him. And then obviously me and Maui, have really great chemistry after working many, many events together at this point, between the Copenhagen RMRs, the Shanghai RMR, Shanghai Major, the PGL events. We've been working a lot of desks together, and we definitely just have really good chemistry. We sync together well, and it's always great working with him, obviously. It was really cool to work the Blast Rivals event because that's when, Vitality made history by, I think I worked the game where they tied Liquid's record for Series 1 in a row. And then by the end of the event, they had broken that record. And then obviously I got to work on the grand final of it. They had this interesting thing where, similar to PGL, they had 3 analysts on the desk for the grand finals, but they were rotating analysts because we had 4 analysts. And rather than having someone sit out, they rotated us through. And so I got to work, I think, 3 of the 4 games that got played in that grand final. Or maybe it was all 5. I can't remember. It might have been all 5 maps. But I worked 3 of the 5 or something like that. So either way, it was actually cool. My first time working at Blast to get to work on their grand final was actually pretty cool. Something I didn't really expect to do with it being my first time working with them. I just assumed that, I'd probably play a slightly smaller role than some of the other guys. And yeah, it was all 5 maps. But no, I got to be involved, and it was a really good time. Really enjoyed working with them. They have a great crew. They do things a little bit differently than PGL when it comes to how they plan out the show and how they do their meetings and stuff like that. But different is not bad. It just took me a second to get used to it and kind of get a feel for their workflow. But it went really well, and I thought I worked with them really well. They seem to enjoy it as well, and so hopefully I'll maybe work more with Blast in the future. We'll have to see, obviously as a freelancer, maximizing your outlets of where you can work is important. If you're kind of pigeonholed to just working with one company, then that limits the amount of work you can do. And so if you're able to, have the ability to work with multiple operators in the space, that as a freelancer is obviously great. Yes, it would be cooler, I guess, from a security perspective if you signed a long-term deal with one TO and they guaranteed you a certain amount of gigs and money and you just focus on working on their product solely for a year. I could see that being advantageous because it gives you a little bit more comfort and stability. But it is also cool to be able to get out there and work with multiple different events, get to work with different people, get to work on different types of shows almost where things flow a little bit differently, or the culture's a little bit different, or maybe there's like different segments that you do. Like, for example, for Blast, we were like filming skits and stuff like that, which is something I haven't really done before. Then that can be a lot of fun, right? And it can be kind of cool to kind of get to work with different people and kind of get to experience, again, different cultures and whatnot of how things operate. So all in all, really had a good time there. And hopefully I, am able to work with them more in the future, because I did really enjoy it. And I hope people enjoyed my work there. I thought it was interesting. We did like the whole co-streaming thing as well, which is kind of interesting, like an event co-streaming their own event. That was interesting, but it's also a lot of fun. So can't really say too much about that. But then I went straight from there to Astana. And this is interesting because, new region of the world I hadn't traveled to before. I've been to some Eastern European countries in the past. Like, obviously, I've been to Ukraine. I did some stuff with Starladder in the past. Obviously, I've been to some other places here and there in that area of the world. But then traveling all the way to, Kazakhstan, which is like more of a Central Asian country than an Eastern European country. And while Russian is one of the predominant languages there alongside Kazakh, like, they actually do have just a ton of different peoples that live there. People of different religions, different countries, different languages, different cultures. And so it is just a very interesting place. Lots of really cool architecture that I got to see. Obviously, the hotel we got to stay at was fantastic. The venue was really cool. It's, their hockey arena. And it was just a really good time there as well. Working with PGL at this point has gotten to a place where I'm just very comfortable. I understand the flow. We all get along very well. We all know, the expectations. We all know, just how to flow together, how to make a product together. And we have like a nice kind of strong foundation there. And it was a lot of fun as always. Getting to see a new place. Obviously there was a lot of cool storylines at that event with, Maladoy being a Kazakh, player, and with Astana actually being his home city. So it's not just his home country, but also the city he's from, getting to play in front of his city. So the whole thing with Maladoy was really cool. And then there was a lot of other cool storylines in that tournament, right? I mean, you have Astralis with Hooksy making all the way to the grand final. That was crazy. Spirit ultimately winning the event, but that was the expectation. But the fact that Fury was able to make some noise with this crazy international roster at Astana was certainly a pretty interesting storyline. I'll say that. The whole like Aurora and Mongols battling for number 5 in the world rankings was also kind of a thing here. This time Aurora got the better of the situation, making it to a third place finish at this event. But obviously Mongols got the better of them, I guess you could say, at Dallas. So it's still kind of a back and forth affair there on if one of them's going to get their shit together. Obviously another disappointing event for Na'Vi. After not making the playoffs in Melbourne, they again don't make playoffs here against a much weaker field than what they're used to playing against. And they used to be kind of the golden child. Like, they were the team of last year. They were certainly a team that was in the top 5 going into this year and have slowly just kind of faded further and further behind. So that's something to keep an eye on. NIP was also a really cool story in IP, being able to make the playoffs, their first really big land. I mean, they played the Philadelphia in Vegas, of course, but much weaker field. And so to see them come here with a hard schedule, I might add, like, people forget, like, they played VP first and won, then they played Spirit, then they played Aurora, lost those games, but then they beat Ho2 and G2 with the stand-in to make playoffs. And then even in the playoffs, they had a pretty decent showing, in my opinion. In that quarterfinals matchup against Spirit, they nearly won a map there. They had a couple of close maps, had their chances. So all in all, I thought it was a pretty cool run for NIP as well. That was a pretty cool story for them. And really that was kind of the main stories, I feel like, as far as competition goes. I mean, obviously VP continued to struggle. G2 had to deal with the stand-in, so they're struggling. Pain's still struggling. I think Gamer Legion had a big miss this tournament after doing so well at Melbourne. So there was a couple other stories, but really, I don't want to focus too much on the CS here and focus more on the personal side, which is that, first and foremost, that was Tech Girl's first stadium as a desk host, and she did fantastic. Didn't skip a beat. Didn't get fazed by it whatsoever. Did a fantastic job. And kind of like when I was shouting out Darth Mike earlier, Tech Girl is another person that should be out there more often. She's a very good desk host, but she's also capable of doing interviews and doing other stuff as well. So hope that we get to see her a lot more. Obviously, the rest of the talent there are all veterans and did great work, as they always do, whether it was the remote casters on the B stream or whether it was obviously the main casters that were there on site. Obviously, I got to get to see Dan again, DDK, as he worked both the Blast Rivals event and the Astana event. We actually traveled together between the two events and kind of hung out the first couple of days in Astana together because we got there earlier than most people did. And it was just cool getting to see Dan again. You know, he's someone I kept in touch with even after he was out of CS because we were both working in Valorant together. And so I've always kind of kept in touch with him here and there, but it was kind of cool to get to see him in person and kind of see him make his comeback. And, you know, I wish him the best on that situation. It seems like things are going well so far, so we'll see how it continues to play out. But obviously that was really cool stuff to see as well. And then, you know, at this point, all the other people are people I've been working with fairly regularly at this point. You know, there's still some people I haven't gotten to work with yet that I'd like to. Like, I've never worked with Freya yet as a host. I did finally get to reconnect and work with Astana at Cluj, so that was really cool. But then other than that, you know, I'm used to now working with Richard and Tech Girl quite a lot. Obviously sharing the desk with Maui, Blah, Yanko, Pimp, you know, and Vu and Dupree at Blast Rivals. So I'm starting to kind of, you know, get to work with everyone again, kind of fit back in, I guess you could say, after being away for a while, and starting to feel less and less like the new guy and outsider, and starting to get a little bit more and more comfortable just being around more. And so that's really cool. And then other than that, I've just really been trying to focus on being the best analyst that I can be. And that's kind of how I'll end this video is, you know, I think initially it was a lot about trying to get my knowledge back up to speed when I got back into CS. So it was about kind of reforming my system of how I go out and prepare. And so some of it is obviously like statistical stuff and just general stuff like a team's recent form, a team's recent results, a team's map pool in the sense of what they like to pick and ban, what they perform well on. If there's any general trends, like, oh, they've won their last 7 games in a row on this map, or they've lost their last 5 out of 6, so they're kind of trending downward. Like, understanding a team's overall map pool and the team's overall performance and things of that nature is one thing. Same goes for all the players on that team, understanding their individual performances, if they're trending up or down, how they're performing, then about the role that they play within their team and how they perform within that role specifically, on top of their overall performance. Then it comes down to understanding the team strategically. You know, how do they like to play? What's their style? You know, what's their most common way to approach things? Do they have anything that they bring to the table that's unique? You know, then keeping up with whether they're making any changes lately. Have they swapped some spots around? Have they added some new things to the playbook? You know, these are all things that I'm, you know, really trying to prepare a lot for. I prepare very hard for these events. And so working, you know, through the Shanghai Major and through the first couple events this year, that was really my focus, was just making sure that I could be really well researched, really well prepared, and bring insights to the desk. You know, that's been my main goal, is I like to go out to the desk and set the table and let you guys know what to expect. You know, and some of that stuff is basic stuff, but some of it, sometimes I can kind of get into the weeds and find out some really cool stuff. You know, so for example, when it comes to like a team changing who's playing what spot on the CT side, I'm able to pick it up pretty quickly, bring it up, and let's see how it plays out, you know, set the table. That's why I like the whole map graphic thing I did with PGL. It's been really cool because you get to actually see the players on the map overview and you get to talk about key matchups and win conditions, and I really love that shit. I love the pregame segments where we set up the match, you know, set up what the expectations are, because either A, things play out the way we thought they did, and we set the table for you so the expectations were met, or if they don't, then we get to come back and talk about, well, why didn't it go the way that we thought? What changed? What went differently? Like, what matchup didn't go the way we thought it would? Or how did one team, you know, exploit a particular win condition, or something along those lines? Like, it sets up the post game later as well as just, you know, following the match. So I've always really enjoyed that aspect. I think a lot of people really love breaking down rounds post game, you know, just taking the rounds that we're seeing during the tournament and breaking them down in the post game segment. I've always been more of a pregame segment guy. I like setting up the story. I like setting up the key storyline, setting up, you know, what to look out for, you know, the key matchups and key players and key roles that you have to look out for on a certain map or something along those lines. So that's definitely something I'm still working on and still going to keep up with. And again, like every now and then I'll come up with something cool. Like, for example, when I was able to talk about how Shira was opping more aggressively at Blast Rivals and Astana compared to, you know, last year. You know, those are like little trends I'm able to pick up sometimes and bring to the table, and it's cool insights, and that's something I really enjoy doing. But one of the other big things, now that I've kind of gotten that system in place of how I like to prepare and how I like to bring insights to the table, which is something I'm going to maintain, but now it's about trying to find other ways to get better at being an analyst that I'm trying to add to the table. And the biggest thing for me right now is delivery. And some of it is talking speed, because I am naturally a very fast talker, and a lot of people call me out for that. And I mean, it's something I've struggled with my whole career. I'm just naturally I'm a very fast talker. I always have been. I'm always like racing a mile a minute. It feels like in my brain, so my mouth keeps up as best as it can, basically, and that's what causes me to talk really fast. But it's also, sometimes I just naturally get very excited about something I'm talking about, which causes me to talk faster. Or I know I have a short amount of time sometimes to get the information out there that I want to get out, and so talking quickly allows me to get to those points a little bit faster to make up for that time constraint. But in reality, there is some negatives to that. One, sometimes people who aren't native English speakers struggle to understand me. Most Americans can understand me when I'm talking fast, but there's a lot of people out there who, English is their second language, and maybe their primary language is Danish, or their primary language is Spanish, or their primary language is Russian, or whatever the case may be. And so when I'm talking really quickly in English, those people might struggle to keep up with what I'm saying, and that's a delivery problem that I do need to work on. And I'm trying. It's going to take time, but something I'm consciously looking to do. I think pacing also is just generally really cool on the desk too, because like pacing is obviously very important as a play-by-play commentator, because you're setting up plays, you're kind of starting off slow and you're kind of building the round up as it gets more exciting, or you're building a match up as it gets closer and closer to the finish line. And there's a lot of, science to pacing within commentary. But I think the same could be said with how you deliver a point on the desk. When you're talking about a really important storyline, right? Like the best example I can come up with off the top of my head is if you go back and watch the desk I did when Heroic beat Na'Vi in the build up to the quarterfinals of the Shanghai Major, not Na'Vi out of the playoffs, and Heroic took their spot because of that. I got really upset, or not upset, but I got really emotional about it, because like Na'Vi, this is their chance to be great. This is their chance to have the first air of CS2. This is they're supposed to be the best. And I remember there was a point when they were losing the series, like Tech Girl, I can't remember what she did. She's like, why does this bother you so much? And I was like, because they're supposed to be the best. And I kind of had like almost this impassioned speech about it. And on the flip side, I also had kind of an impassioned speech about how Heroic was able to build themselves up at the end of the year to be a legit team. And in those moments when you're delivering those like really key storylines, it's nice to be able to kind of tell the story and kind of build it up. I did the same thing, actually. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, I swear, but I did kind of the same thing when Complexity were playing FaZe at Bucharest, because it was that whole situation where, the ownership group, when they bought FaZe, had to pick and choose between Complexity and FaZe and who would represent them in Counter-Strike, and it caused Jason Lake to have to rebuy the Complexity organization another time after having to do the same thing after the CGS, and how important it is, I think, for him to be able to prove that he made the right call when Complexity was able to beat FaZe in the tournament, that he stuck to his North American roots, really tried to support the NA scene, build an NA team, an America's team, and then be able to beat FaZe, the team that kind of, quote-unquote, took their spot in that ownership group when all the wheeling and dealing went on there. Those kinds of things, I think this pacing can be an important tool, even on the desk, when it comes to kind of building up how important something is, like how big a storyline really is. And so that's something I'm also thinking about alongside the talking speed. But it's also about just basic things like eliminating verbal fillers, like, I hate whenever I go back and listen to a segment that I've done, and it's clear that I have hit a point where maybe the mind's just not clicking the way that I want to. The words aren't quite flowing the way that I'm hoping them to come out. Or I'm stuck trying to think of how I want to answer a certain question. And so you hit those verbal fillers. Whereas if I just slowed down, didn't talk as fast, and had maybe a little pause here and there, I'd have time to get things on track and not stumble on my words, and not have to use a verbal filler, because it's just adding polish at that point. You know what I mean? So that's something else I'm really trying to work on, as well as the entertainment aspect, right? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, while the analyst desk is certainly about analysis and insight, it's also an entertainment product. And so part of that is being able to banter back and forth with your host or your co-analyst, or being able to crack a joke, or being able to lighten the mood with, a certain setup or a certain line or something that just make things a little bit more funny or a little bit more fun. If we're having fun, hopefully you're having fun watching it, right? It's kind of one of those things. And so it's all about the balance of entertainment and insight, analysis and banter. I don't know. There's a mix there that has to happen. And, I've tried to shoehorn that kind of stuff in the past, and it's backfired in my face. So I never want to be something that I'm not, or do something I'm not comfortable doing. But I mean, naturally, sometimes I do just have like a funny bit or a funny idea, and being able to embrace that and bring that to the table, and maybe sometimes being willing to sacrifice a couple of minutes of insight to share a couple of minutes of something funny or entertaining, I think does have value when it makes sense. Maybe in a high stakes game or a grand final, you want to focus, obviously, but if you're early on in the group stage and, you have a little bit of free time to have a little bit of fun too, and that's just something I'm kind of learning the balance of along the way. And that really is kind of the end of it there. That's it. I'm not sure what's next for me. There may or may not have been some town announcements that have come out by the time I've put this video out, where you may have a little bit more of an idea of where I'm at. But, I'll just say, to be safe, that, I'm just not really sure what the future holds right now. And that's a scary place to be. It always is. Again, I'm hopeful that I'll get to do more with PGL at the end of the year in October, as I've already done a lot with them already this year. Hopefully that relationship can continue. It seems like it's in a good place. I'm hoping that I can work more with Blast in the future, with some of the events that they have coming up this year. Because I felt like things went pretty well at Rivals, but I know that they're also like to bring in new people, like to experiment, like they did with Vu, like they did with Dupree. Maybe more pro players want to take a crack at it and they give them opportunities. Like, there's always that situation that could happen, right? And that's what makes being a desk analyst kind of tough, because I just know that, me not being a former CSGO pro or CS2 pro being on the desk, that when a former pro does want to step up and come in, there's always a chance that I might be out for that, So that's always something to kind of worry about as well. But what I'll say is this: it's like I feel pretty confident in the work that I've done so far this year. Yes, there are things I wish I could do better. Yes, there are things that I want to improve. Complacency is your worst enemy. I'm always trying to be better and always trying to maybe not always make big sweeping changes, but adding a little polish here and there, trying something a little bit new here and there. That's the never-ending chase of perfection, which is impossible to do, but you still try to hunt after it as best as you can. It's the best way that I can put it. And that's what I'm about. I'm about trying to improve every time I go on that desk, trying to have a bit more fun, trying to come up with more cool stuff to share. That's something I'm going to keep trying to do. And obviously Starlighter is doing the next major and they're getting back in the CS, so maybe that's an option. I don't know. All I can do is the best work that I can do and continue to try to improve each time I go out there, and just continue to try to keep delivering a good product and keep trying to polish that product and reach out and see if people are interested in working with me. And if they are, cool beans. If not, it is what it is, like that's just kind of how things work. Right. And so that's that, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I hope that you folks have been enjoying, my work on the desk, and I hope to be out there more. I hope that you enjoy the content I put here, and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and we'll keep doing it for as long as we can. That's kind of how it works. But thanks so much. I'll catch you next time.